Hello and welcome. You are watching UATV News with me, Ksenia Buhai. Let's start with the latest developments. Ukraine sent another plane to Afghanistan to evacuate Ukrainian citizens. This is aboard of the Ministry of Defense. Oleg Nikolenko, Speaker of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, told us about this. He also noted that there are 12 Ukrainians at the former military base near Kabul. All of them worked under private contracts and have no relation to the Ukrainian army. Now the Ukrainians are in safety, but they cannot leave the base yet. The issue of their evacuation is being resolved. At the moment, 153 Ukrainian citizens who want to leave Afghanistan have contacted the diplomats.
We are currently working upon two plans. The first is to take people out by plane, which is already at the Kabul airport, and the removal of people by plane, which was sent by the Minister of Defense of Ukraine this morning. There are three tasks that Ukrainian diplomats are dealing with now. The first is a safe corridor to access the airport, the second is the safe boarding of people on the plane, and of course the third is obtaining permission to take off and safely leave the territory of Afghanistan.
Attack on a journalist. The Kyiv District Court arrested 19-year-old Mikita Hubsky for 2 months, and 17-year-old Anton Holoshyakov was put under house arrest. Both guys took part in the attack on a photo correspondent of the Bukvy online edition, Alexander Kuzhelny. Everything happened during the rally near the office of the President of Ukraine on August 14th. A group of young people first demanded that the journalist delete all the photographs he took and then severely beat him. Ukrainian rescuers who helped to extinguish wildfires in Greece returned home. A special flight from Athens landed at the Kyiv airport yesterday. Minister of Internal Affairs Denis Monastyrsky and head of the State Service for Emergency Situations Mykola Chechotkin met the combined detachment of 100 people. They thanked firefighters for the work. The latter managed to save 2 settlements from fire and eliminate fires on an area of several thousand square meters.
Ukraine has also faced a disaster last year. This year, Turkey and Greece faced problems, and it is great that Ukraine was able to help another country in this difficult situation.
Ukraine has increased the pace of vaccination against COVID-19. 1 million people are immunized against the coronavirus every week. Prime Minister of Ukraine Denis Shmyhal spoke about this at a meeting of the Cabinet of Ministers. He also added that more than half of the country's adult population is planned to be vaccinated by the end of the year. As of August 18th, almost 1,500 new coronavirus infections have been registered in Ukraine. More and more residents of separate districts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, uncontrolled by Ukraine, are trying to leave the territory. According to the Eastern Human Rights Group, since the beginning of August, the queues on border with Russia, as well as along the contact line, are only becoming bigger. Human rights activists associate this with the preparation for the school year. Parents want to have their children sign in to universities, hostels and dormitories. Besides, there is one more factor. Human rights activists believe some residents of the territories uncontrolled by Ukraine do not want to vote in the elections to the State Duma of the Russian Federation.
We think that this is a kind of a quiet protest of the residents of the separate districts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. They cannot protest there or demand to protect their rights, but they can quietly leave not receiving the codes, and thus they can sabotage the Kremlin's order that 75% of those who were issued the Russian passport there should take part in the elections.
Another wave of searches took place in the Crimean Tatars' houses and the occupied Crimea on the night of August 17th. Russian security forces started searches in 5 houses in several areas of the peninsula at once. The Crimean Solidarity non-governmental organization informs that unknown servicemen introduced themselves as officers of the Federal Security Service of Russia, the Center for Countering Extremism and the Amon Special Detachment. The lawyer Adam Semdlyaev arrived at the place of the search, but he was not allowed to see his clients.
They gave no explanation as to why I'm not allowed. A complaint will be filed to the prosecutor's office against these actions of the law enforcement officers, and we will definitely appeal those actions.
Aggravation of hostilities in temporarily occupied territories of Donbas, Russian military build-up on the Ukrainian border, and constant informational attacks. This is how Kremlin tries to destabilize the situation on the verge of the forthcoming summit of Crimean Platform, 30th anniversary of Ukrainian independence, and meetings of Volodymyr Zelensky with Angela Merkel and Joe Biden, experts state. What is Russian aim and whether the West may cut its support to Ukraine? Our correspondents found out.
Shelling in Donbas has ended up in fresh wounded and deaths among Ukrainian soldiers and the civilian population. Over the past several weeks, illegal armed formations have opened fire not just against positions of the Ukrainian army, but against the civilian population as well. The situation aggravated not only in Donbas. Russia has put its military forces stationed in the Ukrainian border and in Crimea on a high alert.
Since the beginning of summer, they intensified efforts and capacity. This is true both for northern direction, there in Belarus they deploy trains with new troops, equipment and vehicles, and southern direction in Crimea, where the military drills have already started on the 20 grounds.
The Trilateral Contact Group issued a statement stating Russia uses the escalation of the situation as a blackmail tool to intimidate Ukraine on the eve of the important international events.
I mean the Crimean Platform and Biden's meeting with Zelensky and Zelensky's meeting with Merkel. Russia is afraid that there may some agreements be reached that are not beneficial to it, and therefore it shows its military capacity to the West and the threat of starting large-scale military operations in the Donbas.
Concurrently, the Kremlin has gone on a propaganda rampage, particularly reinforcing information attacks against the Crimean Platform, like in the following statement.
Yet another mayhem is going to take place in a week, the Crimean Platform, where the West will continue cherishing neo-Nazi and racist behavior of the current Ukrainian authorities. If our Western partners are forced to hide their complete recognition of reality in a bid to play in troglodyte instincts of the current Ukrainian authorities, that's regretful. They just back themselves into the corner, and it will be extremely tough to get out of it.
According to Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, by such an action, Kremlin once again proved its fear of the results of the Crimean Platform summit.
Let me be frank, I'm pleased with such a neurotic reaction. Citing the famous saying by Mahatma Gandhi, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. The Russian Federation has successfully passed the first two stages, and now they are on the third. They are fighting us. And there will be the fourth one, the stage of Ukrainian victory and the return of Ukrainian Crimea.
Attempting to disrupt the successful event of the Crimean Platform summit, Russia has been threatening countries which are planning to take part in it.
It's just another poor way to invent their own Magnitsky List. Considering that Russia is more dependent on Europeans and the US than Europe and the US on the Russian Federation, I think they have little to worry about.
Experts also believe that the aggressive rhetoric is being employed by Russian politicians to mobilize the electorate on the verge of the election to the State Duma.
Lavrov himself is in the top 5 of the United Russia Party members list. He plays his role as an electoral locomotive. They aim to bring some achievements for United Russia, including in the Crimea and among the holders of Russian passports in Donbas.
Despite the Kremlin blackmailing attempts, Western partners do not refuse to support Ukraine. Particularly, this concerns military assistance and struggle for the country's sovereignty. 40 countries have confirmed their participation in the Crimean Platform summit, reported by Nick Starkov, UATV News.
Ukraine has sent new materials on the illegal transfer of Crimean prisoners to Russia to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The prosecutor of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea notes that they continue collecting, systematizing and submitting to the facts revealed to international courts. Ukraine has already submitted 11 reports on human rights violations in the occupied Crimea to The Hague. In particular, they concern the illegal movement of convicted citizens from the occupied peninsula to the territory of Russia. At present, 464 Crimeans are kept in Russian prisons. They have been sentenced by the illegal occupation courts.
для Міжнародного кримінального суду.
Continuity and large scale of the reports and violations are of a great importance for the International Criminal Court. The new materials are only proving the context, because, as we see starting from year 2016 until year 2021, the crimes committed earlier are still being committed in the Crimea.
The Ukrainian Congress Committee of America published its Crimean Doctrine ahead of the Crimean Platform summit to be held on August 23rd. The document rejects the illegal occupation of Crimea by Russia. It also condemns the attempts to deprive the Crimean Tatars of their representative body of the Majlis, the large-scale issuance of Russian passports, and the build-up of the military presence in the occupied peninsula. The doctrine is presented in Ukrainian, English, and Crimean Tatar languages. The committee called on the international community to increase pressure on Russia.
Ukrainian Congress Committee of America calls on the international community to intensify their condemnation of Russia's illegal occupation of Ukraine and devote all efforts to the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity and the rule of law to Crimea. The only hope for returning basic human rights to the people of Crimea is the end of Russia's military occupation.
More than 1 million electronic applications for admission to the bachelor and master degrees. The Minister of Education and Science of Ukraine is summing up the results of the 2021 admission campaign. How did the quarantine change the rules of admission, and what specialties Ukrainians were choosing this year? Our correspondents found out.
The Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine states the main stage of the entrance campaign has been successfully completed. Almost 60,000 students will be studying at the state budget expense obtaining bachelor's and master's degrees.
Вперше у 2021 році
For the first time in 2021, based on the results of a wide competition, 43 graduates were given the opportunity to study in private institutions of higher education at the expense of the state budget. These are exactly the innovations foreseen by the program of the President of Ukraine and implemented by the Ministry of Education.
The rating of the most popular specialties has remained unchanged for several years. Those are the humanities, law and economics.
рейтинг спеціальностей очолює сьогодні філологія.
Today, the ranking of specialties is headed by philology, for which 76,000 applications have been submitted. The 10th place is the marketing specialty. The rating of higher educational institutions by the number of applications submitted on the basis of complete general secondary education is traditionally headed by the Taras Shevchenko National University of Kyiv.
Vernadsky Taurida National University, which moved from the occupied Crimea to Kyiv, has already accepted 800 students. Every 10th of them came from the temporarily uncontrolled territories of Ukraine.
There are two categories of applicants. These are children from the occupied territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city region of Sevastopol, and children from the occupied territories of Donbas. They are motivated, therefore they persistently overcome the difficulties they face.
They promised in the Ministry of Education that next year they are going to make the admission process even more convenient for future students. Reported by Vadim Kramer and Yulia Krychkova, UATV News.
Ukrainian Constitution by Pilip Orlik and Hetman Ivan Mazepa's mace. Everyone can now see these unique artifacts of Ukraine's history. The exhibition in the National Reserve St. Sophia of Kyiv will be open starting 10 a.m. every day. The first Ukrainian Constitution and Hetman's mace were specially delivered from Sweden owing to the 30th anniversary of the independence of Ukraine. According to Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, negotiations on the delivery of the original of the historical document lasted for about 13 years.
Конституції Пилипа Орлика дуже чітко написано.
The constitution of Pilip Orlik says that Ukraine can defeat Russia only in alliance with the Crimean Khanate. This is one of the foreign policy postulates of the constitution of Pilip Orlik, and therefore I believe that the presence of the constitution of Pilip Orlik is also a great sign for Ukraine.
And today we're here at St. Sophia to celebrate two objects which symbolize that very statehood of which Yaroslav the Wise and Princess Ingrid were the first custodians. The bulava of Ivan Mazepa and the constitution of his successor, Pilip Orlik.
Scythian Gold, an exhibition of unique Asian jewelry, was presented at the National Museum. It is dedicated to the 30th anniversary of Ukraine's independence. Our correspondent has also attended it and prepared a report.
The details of these works still impress not only audience but experts as well. 50 unique artifacts of Scythian times gold jewelry, which is more than 2,500 years old, were presented in the National Museum of the History of Ukraine.
2,500 years ago, the Scythians occupied the land between the Danube and the Don rivers. They still impress with the legacy they've left us. It's an extraordinary art, gold artifacts. And this is not only jewelry, but also extremely fine work on weapons, utensils and everything else.
Perhaps the most famous archaeological find in Ukraine, the golden pectoral, is among the collection items. 160 different objects are depicted on it. It is made of pure gold and weighs more than a kilogram.
There are also sets of women jewelry, gold utensils and even weapons of the ancient Scythians. All of them are made of gold of the highest standard.
It is interesting because the sword itself was made of iron. Its handle as well as front part is covered with gold plate. The plate has several very important images for the Scythians.
However, part of the Scythian treasures remain outside Ukraine, in the Netherlands, for more than 7 years. About 500 items were provided in 2013 by several museums for the international exhibition. After the Russian occupation, the Amsterdam Museum faced the question of where and how to return the exhibits. Some of the Scythian treasures were returned to Ukraine. The court proceedings are still dragging on.
We believe, or better to say, we are sure that the court will make a fair decision, and the phantom Crimean museums controlled by Russia will return the Scythian gold to Ukraine.
In April this year, the Amsterdam Court of Appeal resumed the hearing of the case on the ownership of the Scythian gold, and the court's decision has to be announced on the 14th of September, reported by Nick Starkov, Vlada Tsurkan, UATV News.
Everyone can now become a legend of Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky approved the regulation on the new state award, National Legend of Ukraine. It will be golden in the form of a stylized flower, the petals of which are covered with blue and yellow enamel. Both citizens of Ukraine and foreigners can receive the award. The president will present the National Legend of Ukraine for the services and the formation of independent Ukraine, protection, strengthening of statehood, and for significant contribution to the development of the country. That's all for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. More updates on our official website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter pages.